Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're back with another innovator interview. You know, the future of meat is going to involve far fewer animals raised in inhumane industrial farms, which are known as concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. In a CAFO, animals are packed into small spaces polluted by their own waste. It's a horrible life that ends in terror. Now, our guest, Paul Shapiro, is an author and the CEO of the Better Meat Company. It's a Sacramento-based company that has developed a variety of plant proteins that can be used to replace some of the beef, chicken, pork, turkey, fish, and shellfish in recipes. It's kind of like a filler that extends the volume of the meat, so you need less of it. And that will lower our environmental impact and reduce the need for all of that cruel treatment. The Better Meat Company uses Rhiza. It's a fungus protein that has meat-like texture and tastes like meat that it supplements. He's also, by the way, the host of the Business for Good podcast. We'll share that link in the introduction to this podcast article. But there's a lot to talk about here, and you can learn more about Paul and his company and podcast at bettermeat.co and Business for Good podcast, all one long word, businessforgoodpodcast.com. Paul, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hey, Mitch, it's great to be talking with you. I am a fan of what you're trying to accomplish by amplifying folks who are trying to give us a ghost of a chance of saving the planet and humanity from humanity. So I'm grateful to you, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve, and that's what we can focus on today. So let me first ask, I've watched your TED Talks, and you're a passionate advocate of humane animal treatment. What got you focused on the conditions in which we raise the meat that we use for food, or animals that we use for food?
Well, Mitch, I think you put it very succinctly in your introduction, actually. The way that we treat animals on factory farms, which is virtually all of the meat, eggs, and dairy that we produce, it's just something that most people would prefer not to think about because it's so torturous. The fact of the matter is that most of the animals who we're raising for food are treated in ways that are so terrible that it would just be better for them not to be born. Like, life is a curse to them, and the best day of their lives is the day of their slaughter, because it's the day that their misery finally comes to an end. So, I don't want to depress people by, enumerating the horrible things that we do to animals, but suffice it to say that animals like chickens and pigs and turkeys just have really deplorable lives. And for me, I think it's one of these things that future generations are going to be repulsed by. Like, it's so easy for us to look back on our past generations and to see their ethical failings and say, oh, like, how could they have ever believed the things that they did, or how could they have done the things that they did? But I think that our descendants are probably going to have a similar point of view about what we did to animals, especially farm animals in our era. And this is something that's animated my life for a long time, because I really believe that, these animals did nothing to deserve this type of punishment. There's billions and billions of them who are enduring conditions that are far more brutal than we'd even subject the most heinous criminals to. We don't take murderers and rapists and do the things to them that we do to animals who have committed no crime whatsoever, except for being born of the wrong species. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about the treatment of animals. And in the case of meat, though, it just is a somewhat happy coincidence that reducing our exploitation of animals is actually, even independent of the treatment of those animals, which is still very important, is exactly what we need to do to help navigate out of the climate crisis and the biodiversity loss and extinction crisis that we're in right now.
So in your TED Talk, you provide an example that I think is a telling criticism of our society. You can smash a painting of a pig and destroy it, and you can smash the skull of a pig. One is illegal vandalism when you destroy the painting. The other is just business as usual. So
That's
the
right.
question I want to try to dig into a little here is, what's the potential impact of our changing the perspective that animals are here for our use and not treating them as co-residents of the planet? How do you think that would change the way we interact with one another as well as society?
Yeah, sure. So, Mitch, let me just elaborate on the point you're making, which I think is a very astute one. So first, if you walk onto a factory farm and you smash that painting of a pig on the wall, you're probably going to be charged with a felony. However, if you work at that factory farm and you take pigs and you slam their skulls against the ground to kill them, that's, as you mentioned, a standard practice in the pork industry. Even the pork industry veterinarians say that that's a standard practice that they approve of. It's truly sickening to watch this, but they take piglets and that's what they do. They smash their heads against the ground for the piglets who either aren't growing as fast or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. So it's a totally sickening practice to watch. But the point is that, this is standard. And so the question then becomes like, what do we owe these animals? I mean, right now, our relationship with many of the animals on this planet is one that's just based on violence and domination. And what would it look like to have a relationship that's based on compassion and respect? What if instead of viewing the animals on this planet with us, the animals who live on this planet, not merely existing for us, which is how we view them today, but really existing with us, which is how I think we should view them. And there'd be a lot of changes. So you would not see the type of exploitation of animals that is so customary right now. So we would not have the factory farming of animals that produces virtually all of the animal products that we're consuming today. You would not see animals being forced to perform under the threat of violence in circuses for us. You wouldn't see us raising animals in tiny cages so we can skin them to wear their fur and so on. There's just lots of changes. Like our civilization in many ways has been built on the backs of animals, whether it was through having horses who only performed our labor and transport because they were threatened by being whipped, or oxen who we yoked and forced to till our fields, or going up to today where we have a entire system based on the exploitation and suffering of billions upon billions of animals in all types of industries, like I was just enumerating. So I think, though, that we can do better than this. And I think we are better. Most people don't want animals to suffer. When people eat meat, they're not thinking to themselves, oh, I'm so glad that an animal suffered for this. It's kind of like in the same way. If you think about light, right? So you walk into a room and you flick on a light switch. What you're after is not anything to do with fossil fuels. You're just thinking, I want the experience of an illuminated room. That's all you want. Even if you were to think about it, you think, actually, this is probably coming from coal or some other fossil fuel. Well, I think the same is so for meat. Most people eat meat not because animals were slaughtered, but really in spite of that fact. And the reality is that just in the same way that we would be happy to flick a light switch and have that power and that light come from renewable energy, I think a lot of people would be happy to get meat without animals being raised for food, and instead just getting it through the equivalent of renewable energy, which would be real, just growing meat without the need to raise animals.
The way that I think about this, and as I watched your talks, for instance, there's an analogy to the way we treat animals to the way that we approach labor. Not to be too extreme, but if we were to think about, for instance, as people concerned about sustainability, the solar panel we own that is made by somebody who is working in slave labor conditions in Xinjiang, we would be more tuned into that more, because we were also tuned into our co-residency with the animals around us. And that seems to me to be a path out of the industrial thinking that has allowed us to exploit the planet to the point of almost to extinction.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think that part of this is the mindset that we have, and I actually was just watching some of the production of solar panels, which you're pointing out, and it's kind of eye-opening for me actually to realize. It's interesting because you think about how China and Asia in general is now producing the lion's share of the solar panels and the lithium-ion batteries and so on that we're using, and that is not a good thing for a variety of reasons, one of which you just mentioned, that some of it is being produced in these camps, which are horrible places to be working in, but it also creates a dependency for the United States on this other country that is not necessarily good for us. So then I wonder, okay, well, we've already essentially lost the renewable energy wars to China, right? They're producing nearly all the solar panels, all the lithium-ion batteries, because their government prioritized this investment into those industries, whereas ours is instead done the opposite, essentially. Sure, we've done some, but we mainly are just subsidizing fossil fuels. So can we allow the same thing to happen for food? It's one thing to happen in the energy space. It's another thing to happen in the food space. And right now, China and other countries like Singapore and so on are doing so much to try to attract entrepreneurship in the clean meat space, growing meat without animals.
Interesting.
And the US continues to subsidize animal agriculture. And are we going to see 10 years from now that in the same way that we are dependent on China for our clean energy needs, are we going to be dependent on them for our clean protein needs? And that, I think, is a really scary thought. And so my hope is that the United States government, both state and federal, is going to try to incentivize some type of a shift away from animals. And that includes, yes, growing meat from animal cells. It includes plant-based meat. It includes microbial fermentation. There's lots of ways to do this, just like there's lots of ways to build a renewable energy sector with wind and solar and geothermal and more. But can we do it fast enough so that the U.S. doesn't fall behind? I think there's a chance, but we got to get moving.
Well, and that's why our descendants may someday they look back on us and say, they were backward, but they were the ones who decided to make the turn. So hopefully we will. Now, let's talk about the Better Meat Company. You make a material called Rhiza that can replace meat. What is it and how is it grown?
Sure. So let's me just back up and offer a quick thought on how plant-based meat today is made for the most part. So right now, nearly all of the plant-based meat from companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, these really cool companies, they're basically using plants and turning them into things that look and taste like an animal, right? So they're taking peas, they're taking soybeans, they're taking wheat, or some combination of those three crops. And they are subjecting them to a variety of processes. So because plants don't really have the texture of animals, what you end up doing is you have to mill the plant into a flour. So you have like a pea flour now. Once you have that pea flour, then you have to fractionate it because it's not that high in protein. So you need to remove the fiber, remove the fat, concentrate that down. Do you get a protein powder? That's like a type of protein powder that, for example, a bodybuilder would use. But a pea protein powder does not have the texture of animal meat. So then you subject it to a process known as extrusion, which takes a lot of heat and a lot of pressure, and you basically change the structure of the protein from going globular, like plant proteins are, to stringy, like animal proteins are. And that's the basic ingredient for plant-based meat now, is what's called a texturized plant protein or an extruded plant protein. And that
sounds yummy.
Well, the products do taste good, but they are, they are definitely not a whole food, just put it that way. So then the question becomes, well, is there anything else that we could do that might involve using whole foods and get them to taste like animals? Because, the whole point of this is to replicate the taste of meat so that people can enjoy the meat that they want without needing to raise animals. And honestly, I would be thrilled if people would just be happy to eat bean and rice burritos and lentil soup and hummus. Like, I love those foods. I think it's awesome for people to eat them, but meat demand is going up, not down. So we got to do something because people really want it. So then the question is, if it takes a lot to turn plants into animals, what about using not plants? What about using another kingdom altogether? And I'm talking, of course, about fungi. So fungi are a different kingdom. They're not plants, they're not animals, but they're also not directly in between plants and animals. In fact, they are much closer to animals than they are to plants. So fungi, like animals, breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2, which we know is the opposite of what plants do, which they breathe in CO2 and breathe out oxygen. Fungi, like animals, they have to search out their food and then digest it and consume it. Whereas we know plants just put themselves in sun and photosynthesize. So those are just a couple examples of how fungi are much closer to animals than to plants. And this is relevant because what that means is that mushrooms have a much more meat-like texture than plants do. In fact, that's why in Asian cuisine, mushrooms have been used as a meat substitute for centuries, because mushrooms just are much more meat-like than plants are. The problem is that mushrooms don't have much protein. And so you've got part of your way there that you're kind of meat-like in texture, but you're still low in protein. However, a mushroom is just the fruiting body of the fungi. And in fact, underneath the fungi is an entire root-like structure. It's called mycelium. And that is a high protein, meat-like substance that we at the Better Meat Co. grow in a fermentation system that allows this natural process to take place wrapped in stainless steel, allow it to ferment just like you would walk in. It kind of looks like a beer brewery. But what we're growing is this mycelium, or sometimes known as mycoprotein. And what we do is we take potatoes and we feed it to the microscopic fungi. And just in the same way that a cow eats grass and turns it into a steak, our little microscopic fungi eat the potatoes and within hours, they convert it into foods that look and taste like meat. And so this, if you think about, for example, how long it takes a cow, you have to feed that cow for well over a year before you slaughter her. Whereas with our system, we're harvesting our mycoprotein within less than 1 day of fermentation. And unlike with all of these texturized plant proteins, we don't have to do any of that. It already naturally has the texture of meat straight out of the fermenter. And so the only post-harvest process that we engage in is water removal. So basically, we run a fermentation for less than a day. We take it out and we remove water, and you have something that really looks and tastes like animal meat because it's so close in terms of being from fungi, and we ferment it in a way that helps it to have that texture. So this is it seems like a magical process to turn potatoes into meat within hours, but it's not magic. It's just science. But it's something that has a tiny little fraction of the land use, water use, and other resources needed to raise animals. And I think it's going to be the future of meat production.
Do you have a rough estimate of the, say, for instance, the CO2 footprint difference between a pound of beef and a pound of Rhiza-based protein?
You know, Mitch, the reason I don't have that is because, one, we don't have that much money, and it costs like maybe 50 grand to run one of these LCAs, the life cycle analysis. We are going to do it. But the other reason I don't have it is because we don't want to run it until we've optimized our system. So, you know, we are in Sacramento and we are running this fermentation plant that is good, but it's not optimized. And until we optimize it, we're not going to plunk down the 50 grand for the life cycle analysis, because we'll just have to do another one once we have a final process in place.
Fair enough.
So we will do that though, but you know, you can tell that, you know, the fact is, like, you know, we're just basically, you know, running a process for hours here to get this. And instead of beef, which, you know, as I said, takes more than a year. So there are inherent deficiencies. It is surely a minuscule fraction of the resources needed and the greenhouse gas emissions needed to raise animals for food. But I don't have the exact numbers, but I look forward to talking with you again after we have that, because I'm going to be very proud to boast about it.
Well, I hope we talk in the interim as well. But let me ask this. Now, you also advocate using cultured meat, meat grown from animal tissues, but it can be just a pluck of tissue, not killing the animal. What do you think the evolution of culturing animal cells and meat looks like for the remainder of this decade? What percentage of meat can startups potentially replace with clean meat, which I want to get into in a moment, by 2030?
Sure, it's a great question, Mitch. So, you know, just for perspective, plant-based meat has been on the market for decades and is still not 1% of the volume of animal-based meat.
Right.
So, you know, it's going to take a long time. Now, clean meat, which, as you correctly point out, is what's often referred to, it's the name for real meat grown from animal cells. So, you know, what we're doing at the Better Meat Co. is using microscopic fungi to mimic the texture of animal meat, or what Beyond Meat is doing to take plants and try to mimic the texture of animal meat. This isn't a substitute or a replacement for meat. It's real, actual animal meat. It's just grown from animal cells rather than from animal slaughter. And there are a number of companies that are doing this. They're raising hundreds of millions of dollars, but they haven't yet gotten regulatory approval to sell in the United States. Hopefully they will soon. There are a couple countries where they have given regulatory approval, one of which is Singapore, where they're already selling this. And interestingly, the second one looks like it's Qatar in the Middle East. So countries are just beginning to authorize the sale of this type of cultivated meat, so to speak. And, you know, I think it's going to take, you know, within a decade, maybe it gets to 1% of the meat market. I think it will be authorized for sale. I think it's a really good technology that's really important for satiating the meat tooth that people have. But it's going to take a long time because it takes a very, very lot of capital expenditures to build this infrastructure that you need for that type of an industry. So my book, which I appreciate you mentioning, it's called Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World. And I talk about the race between the entrepreneurs and the investors and the scientists and the environmentalists who are all working and racing to commercialize the world's first slaughter-free meat. And there's so many benefits to this. It's very clear that this will be a dramatically preferable way to produce meat compared to the way that we produce it today. But it's just one way to peel this potato, so to speak. Like I said, there's wind, there's solar, there's geothermal, but there's clean meat, there's microbial fermentation meat, there's plant-based meat, and so on. So I'm excited about clean meat, but it's only one stool on the or one peg on the stool, rather.
Yeah. So, and just to share a perspective on this, the United States alone, folks, consumes about 100 billion pounds of meat annually. And so, as Paul mentioned, we're subsidizing that industry, just like we're subsidizing big oil. Now, Paul, what can our listeners do to help accelerate the adoption of plant-based alternatives and clean meat? Should they be choosing plant-based meat, demanding plant-based meat at the store and restaurants? Are there companies they should be investing in?
Well, short answer, Mitch, is yes to everything that you just said. So first of all, if you really like the taste of meat and that's what you want, consider getting plant-based meat. It really does a good job today of mimicking that experience in the same way that, electric cars are getting better and better and even superior to the regular car experience. So the difference is that instead of spending, like a ton of money, it's only going to be dollars, not tens of thousands of dollars more. Mm-hmm. So, again, though, maybe some people don't want to eat meat or have that meat experience and they just want to have a bean and rice burrito. That's awesome too. I think that's great. Tofu and
it takes all kinds.
Right. They've been around for a long time. But if you want that meat experience, plant-based meat today is really a great way to satiate that demand for you. These companies are seeking investment. It's a white hot space right now. Beyond Meat had the most successful IPO of the last 20 years, which has caused a lot of people to get more and more interested in investing in the alternative protein space, because many people believe it really is what's going to be satiating protein of the future. It's kind of like if you think actually, Mitch, about film. So if you go back to the 90s, there was this war between Kodak and Canon where they were vying for supremacy in the film market.
I covered that.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, you know the story then, but for your listeners, Kodak knew about digital. They, in fact, were the first people to invent digital, but they were afraid it was going to cannibalize their core business of negatives and print film and all the chemicals you need for the darkroom and so on. Whereas Canon thought this will cannibalize us, but it's the future. And so we all know what happened. Kodak didn't invest in it. Canon did. Kodak went bankrupt, and Canon is now the largest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet. So there's a lot of people who think that's going to be the same thing, because with Canon, they're still selling us the same service. They're still selling us a way to capture our memories. It's just done in a far more efficient way with digital rather than print technology. Well, we are still going to have meat. It's just going to be done in a far more efficient, humane, and sustainable manner than having to raise and slaughter all these animals for food. And so if you believe that it's going to be like the next digital revolution, this is the time to invest, is right now. Actually, yesterday was the time, but today is the time to invest. So I'm a big proponent of investing in these companies and also donating to the charities that are helping to accelerate the space, like the Good Food Institute, which is a very effective charity working to help the startups in the alternative protein space. Their website is just gfi.org. You can go check them out. But there's a lot that you can do, I think, to be helpful.
Well, thanks. We'll include that link in the article as well. Let's just talk a little more about the sanitary benefits of clean meat, because in a slaughterhouse, there is fecal matter, there's all sorts of contaminants. Clean meat would literally be contaminant free. The benefits of clean meat are something that we need to communicate. Or what ideas do you have about how we can get people to be aware of and start asking for meat that is sanitary?
Yeah, this is such a good point, Mitch. So one of the reasons that it's called clean meat is not just as an allusion to clean energy, though that's important, but it's also because it's just cleaner, literally. So if you think about the meat that people eat today, you're warned to treat it almost like toxic waste in the supermarket. So, you get raw meat at the supermarket, you're supposed to, not let it touch your other groceries. They bag it in a different bag. It gets home. If it touches your kitchen counter, you have to disinfect the counter. If you touch it with your hands, you got to wash your hands. And all of that is because there's feces on the meat. That's what it is. Salmonella, Campylobacter, E. coli. These are intestinal pathogens that can sicken us if we don't cook the crap out of the meat. Literally, that's literally what we're doing, cooking the crap out of the meat. Well, with clean meat, you don't need to worry so much about intestinal pathogens because there are no intestines. You're simply growing the muscle and fat that you want in that meat, and you don't need all of those intestines. In fact, you are more likely to infect the meat with your hands than the meat is to infect you. So it is just literally cleaner, and this would be having huge food safety benefits. So in addition to the climate benefits, the animal welfare benefits, and more, you have real food safety benefits. And we haven't even talked about this, but I do want to just mention, yeah, there's a food safety benefit for humans, but maybe an even bigger benefit is the reduction of pandemic risk. So the United Nations put out a report recently called Preventing the Next Pandemic. And in that report, they talk about the reasons that will be the most likely causes of the next pandemic. Number one on the UN's list, increasing demand for animal protein. Number two, intensification of agriculture, meaning combining more and more animals into smaller and smaller spaces where you give viruses a chance to amplify. And number three is the bush meat trade, meaning slaughtering wildlife for meat. So the numbers one, 2, and 3 reasons that the United Nations says that we are going to have another pandemic are all related to humanity's desire to eat meat. We have to do something to prevent that from happening. If you look at this pandemic that we're in right now, I mean, it doesn't feel like it, but it's a pretty minor pandemic, less than 1% mortality rate. What if it were higher? What do you think would happen to our civilization? It was 5% or 10% mortality. Then you're talking about something that's really civilizationally threatening, not just bringing us to our knees, but really knocking us down and out. So I am passionate about the treatment of animals, but I actually think this is, in addition, a key. The alternative protein industry is a key necessity to helping reduce the risk of some major calamity occurring for our species.
The industrial system itself is also going to contribute to our continued diminished environmental experience. And so there are so many benefits of this, Paul, and I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us about it. One last thing, you do the Business for Good podcast. You have great guests. Could you share an episode folks should start with?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I'm very appreciative of you bringing that up. So in addition to running the Better Meat Co., I also host the Business for Good podcast. And the latest episode is actually one of my favorites. So it's episode number 73. And when you think about what happens when you die, most people today are choosing either cremation, which is essentially one final act of pollution, or they're having a conventional burial, which means they have a concrete liner in the ground, a hermetically sealed grave, formaldehyde pumped throughout your body. I mean, everything is designed to basically prevent you from giving your nutrients back to the earth. Well, there is an entrepreneur named Katrina Spade who founded a company called Recompose, which has now changed laws in 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, and hopefully more soon to come, that allow for their method known as natural organic reduction. And what that means is they basically can take your corpse and compost it in a way that renders it nothing but rich soil within only 30 days. And it's a really fascinating thing to think about, because people right now, you can pre-order a plot for yourself, for example. Sure. Well, people are pre-ordering their own composting. They have about 1,000 people so far. Well, first of all, they've already composted about 60 human corpses, and 1,000 people have already pre-ordered their own composting for their body. So I think of this as a really cool thing, because, the death industry is extremely eco-unfriendly. Yeah. But what if when you die, you could actually give your nutrients back to the earth and not try to either seal yourself off from nature in your casket and the concrete liner, or, burn all your nutrients up into the atmosphere, but actually compost yourself. That's one idea of a company. And this is a real business. Katrina's raised $12 million for her company. She's created an industrial composting facility for humans. I mean, it's really a cool idea.
That sounds fascinating. And folks, check it out. By the way, I married into the casket industry, and attended some of the national conventions, which were truly bizarre. But the waste, even after we're gone, is something that, like turning on the light and not recognizing all the downstream implications of turning on that light or buying the solar cell. It's illuminating to look behind the curtain and see what's back there. Paul, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Again, I want to express my gratitude to you for all you're doing to help give the planet a voice here and trying to, again, save humanity from itself. So thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to talk with you, and I hope that we get to talk again sometime.
Well, please do come back and keep us up on what's going on. We've been talking with Paul Shapiro. He is the CEO of the Better Meat Company, based in Sacramento, California, as well as the host of the Business for Good podcast. You can check out Better Meat Company at bettermeat.co, all one word, bettermeat.co, and you can see his podcast at businessforgoodpodcast.com. Again, all one word, businessforgoodpodcast.com. Folks, take a few minutes to share this interview and others that we do with folks around you, because spreading our ideas, spreading this conversation is how we are going to create the many solutions that are going to add up to an exit from this industrial dead end that we are currently in. We can save this planet, we can save ourselves, and we can certainly make the lives of all the animals and all the people on this planet better if we keep it up. So please do share it. We'll be back with another innovator interview again soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet. We'll be back soon.